Thank you, Dale. I'm not talking to myself either. It's really good to be here with you all tonight. This is my first time actually being in Alabama and driving down from Tennessee. It's a beautiful countryside here. I was expecting a little more swampland, but I guess that's further south if I want to see that. But really great to be here with you all. Dale, I met him out at Bear Valley when I was a student there, and his father was a preacher there, and he and his brothers were little kids, and they were running around. So I've known Dale for a while. He was a few years behind me. I was kind of hoping we'd be in school together at the same time because there was another Dale that was there, and I always wanted to tell people this is my brother Dale and this is my other brother Dale. But I'm happy to be here tonight and to talk to you about the Ark of the Covenant. Sometimes people treat things in the Bible as if it's a collection of fairy tales, especially people that are in the world. And they'll say, you got these stories, and these stories are so fantastic. You've got giants like Goliath. You've got, the walls of Jericho falling down. You've got the sun standing still for a day. You've got Jesus being born of a virgin. And these stories are so fantastic that there's no way that these things can be real. And they treat the Bible as if it's just a collection of fables or fairy tales, kind of like Aesop's fables, where you've got the tortoise and the hare, and then there's a moral at the end of the story. And so that it's just a good book of stories with morals to it. But that's not the case. As fantastic as some of the narratives are, the stories in the Bible are real. They're not made up. They're not a fantasy. It isn't magic. It isn't a lot of superstitious hocus pocus. These things are real, and they are things that have happened. And such are the narratives that surround the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant is not a make-believe thing. It was a real, actual construction that was made by Moses. It was made by the children of Israel. It was made according to the plans that God gave them for it. And we'll see that a little bit tonight as details were given by God. The ark itself was representative of something in heaven. When we look at the tabernacle and think about the things that were in the tabernacle and the things that were in the temple, from the table of showbread to the menorah, the candlestick that was there, to the Ark of the Covenant, to the altar of incense, all of these things are representative of things that are in heaven. The originals are there in heaven, and what Moses was told to do was to make everything according to the pattern. And so we'll see that it was representative of God's throne in heaven. That's what the Ark of the Covenant represented within the tabernacle and within the temple. And so we'll take a look at some of that. At the school, I teach 8 different classes during the year, and I get to teach Life of Moses, and so I deal with the Ark being constructed. And I also teach Hebrews, and so I get to talk about how these things in the tabernacle, in the earthly tabernacle, were copies and shadows of the things that are in heaven. And so you're gonna see a little bit of Life of Moses in the book of Hebrews as well tonight as we talk about a little bit of the history of the ark, what the ark itself represented, and then what does that mean for us today. Now, as I said, God gave the instructions of the ark to Moses when Moses was on the mountain. They came to Mount Sinai when the children of Israel left Egypt. And when they got there, Moses went up on the mountain, and God gives him instructions for all of these different things with regards to the tabernacle that he's going to build. And included in that are the instructions for the ark itself. And you'll find that in Exodus chapter 25, beginning in verse 10 and running through verse 22. And if you notice the detail that is here, a lot of times people will say, well, God doesn't care about details. As long as you get the big things, as long as you just love people and do what's right, God doesn't care about the details. God's got a tremendous amount of detail in His Word. When He tells them, here's what I want you to do, and here's how I want you to do it, and here's how I want you to build it, here's what I want you to make it out of, God cares about the details. And so we see a principle there with that. But beginning in verse 10, it says, God speaking to Moses, they shall make an ark of acacia wood. 2.5 cubits shall be its length, 1.5 cubits its width, and 1.5 cubits its height. This is basically 45 inches long, 25 inches wide, and 27 inches wide and 27 inches tall. So it's roughly 4 feet by 2 feet. If you've seen the Raiders of the Lost Ark movie, it looks like it's a little bit bigger than that in the movie. but the actual dimensions of it, going by the 18-inch cubit, would be about 4 feet by 2 feet by 2 feet. He says, you shall overlay it with pure gold inside and out. You shall overlay it. You shall make on it a molding of gold all around. You shall cast 4 rings of gold for it. Put them in its 4 corners, 2 rings on one side, 2 rings on the other side, and you shall make poles of acacia wood and overlay them with gold. You shall put the poles into the rings on the sides of the ark, that the ark may be carried by them. Poles shall be in the rings of the ark, they shall not be taken from it. You shall put the ark, and you shall put into the ark the testimony which I will give you. So God says, here's what I want you to build. Here's the size that I want you to build it. Here's the materials that I want you to use to build it out of. Here's rings and poles that you are to put in this for carrying it. And that was very important because David obviously didn't consult the instructions first when he first wanted to move the Ark of the Covenant later in history into the city of Jerusalem. And they put it on a cart. And the ox stumbled, and Uzzah, we know, put his hand out to steady it, and Uzzah was stricken down because he didn't have respect for the ark. It wasn't the way that they were supposed to be carrying it. When all else fails, go back to the instructions. And that's what David ends up doing eventually and finding out how they were supposed to transport this. But that's what those poles were there for, was for transporting it. And they were to put the testimony in there. They were to put what God gave them, God's word. Those stone tablets were what was to be placed inside of it. So when you really think about what the ark is, it was a box for them to put their Bible in. In verse 17, he says, you shall make a mercy seat of pure gold, 2.5 cubits its length, and 1.5 cubits its width. You shall make 2 cherubim of gold of hammered work. You shall make them on the 2 ends of the mercy seat. Make 1 cherub at one end, and the other cherub at the other end. You shall make the cherubim at the 2 ends of it, one piece with the mercy seat. So you've got this mercy seat that's going to be on top of the ark. It's going to be the cover, if you will, on the ark. And that's going to be made out of gold. It's going to be made out of all one piece. And you're going to have these 2 creatures that are known as cherubim. And you see descriptions of them given in the book of Isaiah, that they had wings that they used for covering their bodies and wings that they would use to fly with. And basically these cherubim are facing one another on the top of this with their wings this way and their faces down looking at the top of that. And so these cherubim would be on top of that in what would be called the mercy seat. In verse 21, you shall put the mercy seat on top of the ark, and in the ark you shall put the testimony that I will give you, and there I will meet with you, and I will speak with you from above the mercy seat, from between the 2 cherubim, which are on the ark of the testimony, about everything which I will give you in commandment to the children of Israel. So God says, here's what it is that you are to do, here's what it is that you are to make, here's what you're to put inside of it, and here, between these 2 cherubim on the mercy seat, is where God was going to meet with Moses. And he's going to meet there with Aaron, and he's going to meet there with the high priests that descend from Aaron. That was the meeting place of where they were going to be able to speak to God, and God was going to be able to speak to them. Now, if you read on in Exodus, those instructions were carried out. The ark was constructed. You can read that in Exodus chapter 37, but the detail there is the same as it is in Exodus chapter 25. There's a lot of repetition with regards to the instructions of what it was that they were to build and then the actual building of it and following the instructions. But the important thing is that everything was done and carried out according to the instructions of the Lord. The children of Israel, we know they messed up a lot. They grumbled a lot. They didn't get to go into the promised land because of all their complaining and grumbling. But at least at this point in time, they did what God instructed them to do. Everything was done according to the instructions of the Lord. If you're in Exodus, if you come over to Exodus chapter 39 and verses 42 and 43, it says, according to all the Lord had commanded Moses, so the children of Israel did all the work. Then Moses looked over all the work, and indeed they had done it as the Lord had commanded, just so they had done it, and Moses blessed them, or Moses praised them. And so you think about you getting the praise of Moses or getting the blessing of Moses, that's some pretty high praise to be able to receive for doing what it was that God had told them to do. But not only did they get the praise of Moses, but God was happy and God was satisfied, and they get the praise of God, if you will, that God approves of this. because we see his presence enter into the tabernacle when all of these things were finished. Not only did they build the Ark of the Covenant the way that they were supposed to, but they built the lampstand, and they built the table of showbread, and they built the tabernacle itself, and they built the altar of burnt offerings. They built all of these things according to God's instructions, and God was pleased with that. In Exodus chapter 40 and verse 34, it says, "Then the cloud covered the tabernacle of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle." We see God's approval in the fact that he moves into the tabernacle. His spirit, his form, if you will, moves into the tabernacle, showing that he's pleased with what it is that they have done, and it indicates his approval there. There's a lesson in there for us, I think, that they followed the instructions, they did what it was that God wanted them to do, and God was pleased. And if we want to be pleasing to the Lord, then we need to follow his commands, and we need to follow his instructions also. Sometimes people will say, well, are you about love or are you about commandment keeping? I don't know how you separate the two. Right? In John chapter 14 and verse 15, Jesus says, "If you love me, keep my commandments." Right? If you love me, keep my commandments. God's pleased when we do what it is that he tells us to do, when we follow the instructions that he gives to us. The Hebrews writer in Hebrews chapter 13, verses 15 and 16, he says, "Therefore by him, by Jesus, let us continually offer the sacrifice of praise to God, that is the fruit of our lips, giving thanks to his name. But do not forget to do good and to share, for with such sacrifices God is well pleased." When we do good, when we share, when we offer the fruit of our lips in praise to God and what it is that we sing and what it is that we pray for, God is pleased with that sacrifice. Now, what's interesting is earlier in the book of Hebrews, in Hebrews chapter 10, beginning around verse 5, it talks about how the Old Testament sacrifices, those burnt offerings and those offerings for sin, that God was not pleased with those, and he took no pleasure in those. And you might scratch your head on the surface of that and say, well, how can that be? Didn't God command them to do it? He told them to make the sacrifices. They made the sacrifices, and it says God has no pleasure in those sacrifices. Well, why? Because every one of those sacrifices in the Old Testament represented a failure on their part. They had failed to do what God wanted. They had failed to keep his commands. And when they messed up, they had to offer a sacrifice. God wasn't pleased with that. God wanted obedience. And so those sacrifices couldn't reconcile man back to God. They weren't sufficient, right? It wasn't enough for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. And so God wasn't pleased with those Old Testament sacrifices because they represented failure. But what God is pleased with is our sacrifice, the fruit of our lips, when we do what it is that he wants and when we're obedient to him. Now later, we don't have time for all the history of the ark. There's a lot of things with regards to the history of the ark. We could spend a couple of lessons probably just on the history of the ark. But later on, the children of Israel end up treating the ark as an idol. They're in battle against the Philistines, and the Philistines beat them. The Israelites, they're not worshiping God correctly. There's a problem with the sacrifices being done properly. You've got Eli, who's the high priest, and his sons, Hophni and Phinehas, who are corrupting the sacrifices. And so there's a problem. There's disobedience here with regards to the children of Israel. And so God's not on their side. And so when they lose the battle, they decide, okay, God's not fighting for us. We've got to bring God into the battle. So they get an idea. We're going to go get the ark. And so they send over to Shiloh where it is. They bring the ark from Shiloh down. They take the ark with them into battle because God's in the box, right? And if we take the box, then God's going to fight for us. And so they treat the ark basically as an idol. Well, God wasn't happy about that either. In 1 Samuel chapter 4, verses 10 and 11, it talks about how they take the ark with them. They go into battle. The Philistines still defeat them, and about 30,000 foot soldiers of Israel are killed. Hophni and Phinehas die in the battle, and the ark is captured by the Philistines. It wasn't right for them to treat the ark as an idol, and God was not on their side. God was not with them due to their disobedience. What they should have done, rather than deciding that, well, we're going to bring this idol, or treat the ark as an idol and bring the ark into battle with them, what they should have done is they should have got right with God, and they should have asked God, what is it that you want us to do? They had the high priest. They had the Urim and the Thummim. They could have communicated with God and said, what is it that we're supposed to do? That's what David does later, is that he communicates and asks God for guidance and direction in fighting Israel's enemies. So the Philistines capture the ark. It doesn't bring them a whole lot of comfort and joy. They have 5 different cities that are their main areas in Philistia, and they take the ark from city to city to city, and every place that it goes, there are tumors, there are plagues, there are rats, there is death. It doesn't bring them any comfort at all. As a matter of fact, the first city they bring it to, there's a temple of Dagon there. Dagon was the Philistine god. And so they wanted to bring the ark as kind of a war trophy and put it in the temple of Dagon. It kind of showed that, well, their God is stronger than Israel's God. And so they put it in the temple of Dagon, and the next morning they come, and Dagon, the statue of Dagon, has fallen down before the ark as if he's bowing down to it. You know, I've never understood idolatry. You take a block of wood and, you know, you cut part of a tree down and you take a block of wood and you carve something and you're going to bow down to that as your God. You take the rest of the wood and you burn it. If you made it, could you not destroy it? It can't speak. It doesn't eat. It can't go anywhere unless you carry it. What is that idol going to do for you? What is that block? But they had the statue of Dagon and it fell down. And rather than realizing that Dagon is nothing, right? I can imagine them coming and saying, "Hey, Dagon, would you get up? Would you act like a god? You know, you're holding back the movement here, dude." Right? They set him back up, and the next morning they come and he's fallen down again, and this time his head and his hands are broken off. Showed the superiority of the true God, which the Philistines should have gotten, but they didn't. And you can read about what happens to the Philistines in 1 Samuel chapter 5. But we've got to be careful that we treat God right as well. We can't treat things as idols. We can't think like the Israelites. They thought, well, if we just take the box with us, we'll be all right. Got to obey God. Got to obey His commands. It doesn't matter what it is that you bring with you as an idol. If you're disobedient, you know, I could wear a cross on a chain and claim to be a Christian, but if I don't do what Jesus said, that cross on the chain isn't going to do me any good. I can go and get a religious T-shirt, and I can wear the T-shirt and you know, demonstrate that I believe in God and I believe in Jesus, but if I don't do what He said, wearing the T-shirt isn't going to do me any good. We can't treat God as an idol. We've got to treat God right. Sometimes people have the idea that God is a genie in the bottle. You know, and when you get into trouble, you rub the bottle or you break the glass in case of emergency and you ask God for His help. Now, certainly we should ask God for His help when we have troubles, but we need to remember God when things are going good as well. We need to treat God right, and we ought to go to God first. A lot of times we try everything under the sun. The Israelites tried everything under the sun, and when all that failed, then they decided to go to God. And so we got to make sure that we treat God right and that we don't treat things as idols. Eventually, the ark comes back to Israel. The Philistines don't want it anymore. It's not doing them any good. It does come back to Israel. It's in the house of a man by the name of Abinadab, where it stays there for several decades until David, in 2 Samuel chapter 6, David eventually brings it to Jerusalem. Now, got a little mishap there with Uzzah along the way before they get it to Jerusalem, but eventually they get the ark to Jerusalem, and in 1 Kings chapter 8, the ark is brought into the temple of Solomon, and God's presence again comes into the temple, showing that God approves of what it is that they're doing. But the ark was real. The ark was a real thing. The narratives that are written about the ark demonstrate it as being a real thing and not some sort of make-believe thing, not some sort of myth, and not some sort of legend. That the ark is referred to, even in the New Testament, as something that is real. And so we can believe what the Bible says, that the ark was real. The Ark of the Covenant was that. Now, what did it represent? According to the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia, it says that the common teaching of the Old Testament was that the ark was designed to be a symbol of the presence of God in the midst of His people. So this was to represent God. It was obviously where God was going to meet with them. According to the Lexham Bible Dictionary, the Israelites believed the Ark of the Covenant was symbolically Yahweh's throne, representing His very presence on earth. And so that's kind of the idea that we get with regards to what the ark was, is that it was a representation of God's throne. It was here as we said before, that God would meet with Moses, that God would meet with Aaron, that God would meet with the high priests from between those two cherubim there on the ark. That was the representative, if you will, of the high priest coming before God's throne and speaking to God or getting direction from God. Exodus 25:22 says from between the two cherubim, God was going to command them all the things that he was going to command them. But could they just go in there at any time? When they put the Ark of the Covenant in the most holy place behind the veil, they couldn't just go in there any time that they wanted to. And anybody could not go in there to speak to God. It was one person. It was the high priest, and it was one time, one day a year that he was allowed to go in there. And any other time was forbidden. And so being able to approach God's throne, being able to approach the Ark of the Covenant, was not something that was for everyone to be able to do. Leviticus chapter 16 details for us the Day of Atonement, or what is known as Yom Kippur. In Leviticus 16, verses 1 and 2, it says, "The Lord spoke to Moses after the death of the two sons of Aaron when they offered profane fire before the Lord and died." It's interesting that there are several reminders in Scripture of the fact that Nadab and Abihu did not do what God wanted them to do, and they died as a result of that, how serious God took that. Verse 2, "The Lord said to Moses, 'Tell Aaron your brother not to come at just any time into the holy place inside the veil before the mercy seat which is on the ark, lest he die. For I will appear in the cloud above the mercy seat.'" So he wasn't just to go in there at any time that he wanted to. They kept it behind a second curtain. You had in the tabernacle and in the temple two spaces that were designated. One that was called the holy place, and it was in the holy place that you had the table of showbread and the menorah and the altar of incense. But then you had the most holy place, which was behind another veil, and back there is where the Ark of the Covenant was kept. And so when priests would do their duty, they could come and they could light the lamp, or they could attend to the table of showbread, or they could burn incense. And they could do that in the holy place, and the priests could come in and do that, and there were various priests that were assigned to that. But they couldn't go behind that veil to where the Ark of the Covenant was. Only the high priest could do that, and only on the Day of Atonement, only one day during the year was he allowed to do that. He also had to have his priestly garments on when he went in there. Now, he didn't just, go back there in his work clothes. He had special garments that were created for the task of performing his priestly duties. If you're still there with me in Leviticus 16, verses 3 and 4, it says, "Thus Aaron shall come into the holy place with the blood of a young bull as a sin offering and of a ram as a burnt offering. He shall put the holy linen tunic and the linen trousers on his body. He shall be girded with a linen sash. With a linen turban he shall be attired. These are holy garments. Therefore he shall wash his body in water and put them on." Before he was able to go into the tabernacle and into the most holy place, before he would go into the temple and behind the veil to approach the Ark of the Covenant, he had to have these holy garments on him. Before he put them on, he had to wash his body. Now they had, in the temple complex, they had what was known as the bronze laver, and it was just a big bronze bowl, if you will, that was filled with water, either 2,000 or 3,000 baths, depending on where in the Old Testament you read. But that's a lot of water that was in there, and they would basically immerse themselves. And so when they would wash, they would strip down, they would go into this, they would walk across, they would immerse themselves, they'd come out on the other side, and they'd put their priestly garments on, and then they would go do their business. It's important to remember that, because we're going to come back to this principle here in just a little while when we talk about what this means for us. But they had to be immersed, and they had to be clothed in their priestly garments before they went about their business. It talks about this in Exodus 28. Exodus 28, Moses receives the design for the garments that the priests are to wear, and the garments that Aaron, his brother, the high priest, is to wear when they do their priestly duties. And at the end of Exodus chapter 28 and verse 43, God says, "They shall be on Aaron and on his sons when they come into the tabernacle of meeting, or when they come near the altar to minister in the holy place, that they do not incur iniquity and die." It shall be a statute forever to him and his descendants after him. So, these garments, they were special garments. They were holy garments. These were not your going to Walmart kind of garments, right? These were special holy garments. So today in the church, we have to wear our holy garments. I should have read Dale's email better when he said it was casual tonight, but if I speak without a jacket and a tie on, I may just get suspended by Southeast, but I think Bear Valley would revoke my diploma. So I don't mess with that. But they had to have their garments on. They had to have these holy garments on when they did their business. Only then could the high priest draw near to God in order to make atonement for the sins of the people. Now, others did not have this privilege. Only the high priest was able to do this. It points that out in Leviticus chapter 16. And if you want a New Testament reference, it also points it out in Hebrews chapter 9. So if you come over to Hebrews 9, we're going to look at a few verses there. In talking about the earthly tabernacle, the Hebrews writer in Hebrews chapter 9, beginning of verse 6, says, "Now when these things had been thus prepared, the priests always went into the first part of the tabernacle, performing their services. But into the second part the high priest went alone once a year, not without blood, which he offered for himself and for the people's sins committed in ignorance." And so the high priest was able to go back into the most holy place. The other priests were not. He had to take blood for his own sins and for the sins of the people. He would go back there to make atonement for the people. It was at the mercy seat that this was done, that he would make this atonement, that he would sprinkle this blood on the Ark of the Covenant in order to make atonement for the sins of the nation. If you're still here in Hebrews 9, if you back up to verse 1, it says, "Indeed, even the first covenant had ordinances of divine service and the earthly sanctuary, for a tabernacle was prepared. First part, in which was the lampstand, the table of showbread, which is called the sanctuary. Behind the second veil, the part of the tabernacle which is called the holiest of all, or the Holy of Holies, which had the golden censer and the Ark of the Covenant overlaid on all sides with gold, in which were the golden pot, which had the manna, Aaron's rod that budded, and the tablets of the covenant. And above it were the cherubim of glory overshadowing the mercy seat. Of these things we cannot now speak in detail." The Hebrews writer is going to talk about this earthly tabernacle and how this earthly tabernacle is representative of things that are in heaven, and that the ark is representative of God's throne that is in heaven. And it was at the mercy seat that the high priest would come to in order to make atonement for the sins of the people. Now, if you look at the Hebrew word in Leviticus 16 that's translated as mercy seat, that word means atonement. If you look at the Greek word in Hebrews 9 that's translated as mercy seat, that word means a place of propitiation. Now, if you're not familiar with propitiation, it's satisfying the wrath of God, and that's what the sacrifice of Christ did. But think of it this way. The mercy seat was the cover of the Ark of the Covenant. And it was here where God was going to cover over their sins. Now, the blood of those animals would cover their sins for a time, but they had to do the same thing year after year after year. And no matter how often they did it, no matter how many times they did it, they had to do it again next year because it wasn't enough, right? It's not until the blood of Christ, which Jesus sheds one time, that his blood covers over our sins. And so the mercy seat, where God covered their sins, is where Jesus took his blood to the throne of God in heaven. He went into the holiest of all in heaven and offered his blood and covered our sins. But that was considered to be a shadow. It was considered to be a copy, and we'll look at that in just a couple minutes here. But understand that this system of worship within the Old Testament, with the high priest and the sacrificing of animals and using the Ark of the Covenant as the instrument, if you will, or the representation of God's throne, understand that was temporary. It was never meant to be something that was permanent. It was always meant to be something that was temporary. People wonder what happened to the ark. Where did it go? There are some theories that Shishak, who was a Egyptian pharaoh who invaded Egypt in the, I can't remember exactly when he invaded, but it's before they go into Babylonian captivity. They think that he may have taken it back to Egypt, and if you've seen Raiders of the Lost Ark, that's kind of the idea that they have, that it was taken back to Egypt, and that's where the archaeologists are all looking for it. But historically, in the Bible, the last place that we see the Ark of the Covenant is during the reign of Josiah, which would have been after Shishak had invaded. So if he had taken it to Egypt, the children of Israel must have gotten it back, because in 2 Chronicles chapter 35, verses 1 through 3, it says, Josiah kept Passover to the Lord in Jerusalem. They slaughtered the Passover lambs on the 14th day of the first month. He set the priests in their duties, encouraged them for the service of the house of the Lord. He said to the Levites who taught all Israel, who were holy to the Lord, put the holy ark in the house which Solomon the son of David, king of Israel, built. It shall no longer be a burden on your shoulders. Now serve the Lord your God and his people Israel. And so Josiah tells the Levites, put the ark where it belongs, in the most holy place. Perhaps they had been taking it out for some reason or another, transporting it somewhere. The Bible doesn't tell us exactly, but he says put it in there. It's not going to be a burden on your shoulders anymore. They weren't going to be carrying it around anymore. But historically, that's the last that we see of it. Now, Josiah's before Babylonian captivity. Did Nebuchadnezzar come and take it away? We don't know. But Jeremiah prophesied that in the future, the ark would not be part of the worship of God. In Jeremiah chapter 3, verses 16 and 17, Jeremiah says, it shall come to pass when you are multiplied and increased in the land in those days, says the Lord, they will say no more, the ark of the covenant of the Lord, it shall not come to mind, nor shall they remember it, nor shall they visit it, nor shall it be made any more. At that time Jerusalem shall be called the throne of the Lord, and all the nations shall be gathered to it, to the name of the Lord, to Jerusalem. This is in reference to the Christian age, that when all nations are going to be called to Jerusalem, where the church is going to start in Jerusalem, where Christianity is going to begin in Jerusalem, he says, no more are they going to talk about the ark. No more are they going to come visit the ark. No more is the ark going to be made, because it's not part of New Testament worship. So in the Christian age, there's no reason for it. Jesus told the Samaritan woman at the well in John chapter 4, the time's coming when not in Jerusalem and not on this mountain will you worship the Lord, that God is a spirit, and those that worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. The location wasn't going to matter anymore. The Old Testament system of animal sacrifices was not going to continue anymore. And you see in this, it was very exclusive. Only the high priest on one day a year could approach the Ark of the Covenant and draw near to God. It was a very physical thing. It was a very difficult thing to do. If you were living in Israel, there were 3 times a year that you had to go to Jerusalem for holy days. And so you would go to Jerusalem and you would come to the temple. And when you got to the temple, if you were a Gentile, even if you were a proselyte, you could come to the court of the Gentiles and you could go this far and no further. If you were female, you could go to the court of the women and you could go this far and no further. If you were a Jewish male but you were not a priest, you could go this far and no further. If you were a priest, you could get into the holy place and maybe be involved in the burning of incense or the showbread or the menorah, but you couldn't go behind the veil. Only the high priest was able to go. So it was very exclusive that only one person once a year was able to draw near to God, if you will, to be able to communicate. But now, we can approach God's throne. We can approach the mercy seat through an inner spiritual journey. And we have access to God's throne 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. How well are we using that? Understand the exclusivity of that in history. That we've got something that they didn't have. We've got an opportunity that they didn't have. The high priest would approach on Yom Kippur and ask for mercy and grace for his people. And we can do that through our high priest. Hebrews chapter 3 and verse 1 says, consider the apostle and high priest of our confession, Jesus, the Son of God. Jesus is our high priest, and because of the work of our high priest, because of the sacrifice of our high priest, we can come boldly before the throne of grace and ask for mercy and grace in our time of need. Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 16. Imagine boldly going in there. God says, don't go in there at any time lest you die. Don't go in there unless you're wearing the right garments lest you die. Don't have anyone else go in there except the high priest, lest they die. And we can boldly come stepping in there in order to approach God. What a tremendous blessing that is. But as I said, the tabernacle and the items within it represented real things in heaven. The evidence for that, if you look at some passages in Hebrews chapter 8, verses 1 and 2, it says, "Now this is the main point of the things we are saying. We have such a high priest who is seated at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in heavens, a minister of the sanctuary and of the true tabernacle, which the Lord erected and not man." There's a true tabernacle that's in heaven that was erected by God, that wasn't erected by man. In verse 4, it says, "If he were on earth, being Jesus, he would not be a priest, since there are priests who offer the gifts according to the law. Those earthly priests serve the copy and the shadow of the heavenly things. As Moses was divinely instructed when he was about to make the tabernacle, for he said, 'See that you make all things according to the pattern that I showed you on the mountain.'" The real things are in heaven. The real thing is what casts the shadow. Right? The real thing, the original, is always going to be better than the copy. The real thing is always going to be better than the shadow. Have you ever shadow boxed, Dale? Has your shadow ever punched you in the nose? Has it done anything to you? Can a shadow do any damage? Right? Shadow's not as impressive as the real thing. The copy is never as good as the original. When I was in grad school, I was working on my master's thesis in Russian history, and we had to make sure that our margins were exactly right. And we didn't have word processors back then. You wrote things out on a typewriter, and you made sure that those margins were exactly 1 inch or exactly 2 inches or whatever it was that they were supposed to be. And if you made a copy, if you left that copier on 100%, you know what you got? You got more than 100%. For whatever reason, copy machines, when you have them at 100%, it makes it a little bit bigger. It makes it a little bit fuzzier. And if you take a copy of a copy of a copy, you see that it starts to get blurry, it starts to get fuzzy, and your margins start to shrink. And so you've got to make sure that you set that copier at 98 or 99% in order to keep your margins the right size. And so these things that were on earth, they were copies of the things that were in heaven. And this Ark of the Covenant was a copy, if you will, of the throne of God that we now are able to approach because of what Jesus has done for us. If you're here in Hebrews and you come down to Hebrews chapter 9, it says, "Indeed, even the first covenant had ordinances of divine service, and the earthly sanctuary for a tabernacle was prepared, the first part in which was the lampstand, the table, the showbread, which is called the sanctuary. Behind the second veil, the part of the tabernacle which is called the holiest of all." We already read that. Why am I? That's not what I wanted. Sorry. This is the first time I'm using Logos for my sermon outline, and I can tap on it and it goes to my scripture references, which is really nice because I don't have to thumb through. It makes it easier to find things as long as I tap on the right place. But in Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 24, right? "For Christ has not entered the holy places made with hands, which are copies of the true, but into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us. Not that he should offer himself often as a high priest enters the most holy place every year with the blood of another." So Jesus didn't go into the earthly temple. He didn't go into the earthly holy place. He didn't go before the Ark of the Covenant, if it was still there. He went into heaven and offered his blood in heaven, in the heavenly place. That's the original, and he's there making intercession for us as our high priest. And because of what he did, in Hebrews chapter 10, it says he's torn down that veil. That veil is no longer there. We can go behind the veil that separated others from the most holy place. That veil's been removed, it says. And he says, "Let us draw near." Right? In Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 22, "Let us draw near in full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water." Now, in order for us to draw near, notice two things. Our hearts have to be sprinkled. Sprinkled with what? What was the sprinkling that they did in the Old Testament? It was blood, right? Our hearts have to be sprinkled with the blood of Christ. And when does that happen? When our bodies are washed with pure water. When does that happen? Baptism, right? Baptism is an immersion. Just like the high priest had to be immersed and put his holy garments on, we have to be immersed and put our holy garments on in order to be priests of God, to have that privilege to draw near to Him and approach His throne with boldness. The holy garments that we put on in Galatians chapter 3 and verse 27, for as many of you as were baptized into Christ have put on Christ. Christ is our holy garment. We ought to put that on and never take it off, because it grants us access to God. Thus we can draw near with boldness, but we must be in Christ. So what happened to the ark? Did the Babylonians take it and bust it up? I don't know. The Scripture doesn't say. It's not clear. The history doesn't really tell us what happened to it. Tonight I can neither confirm nor deny that it's currently being studied by top men. If you've seen Raiders of the Lost Ark, you get the reference, I guess. But we can trust in the Word of God. We can believe that the Ark of the Covenant was real. It wasn't just some sort of fairy tale. To have God's throne in heaven, which is very real, represented by a myth or a fable or a make-believe story, that just wouldn't make any sense. The Ark of the Covenant represented God's throne and God's mercy in covering over our sins. It was where the high priest would meet with God. And today, we as Christians can come before God's throne in heaven and meet with God to make our petitions known. But in order to draw near, we have to be clothed in Christ. We have to be clothed with Christ. It's only through His blood, it's only through His sacrifice that our sins can be covered over and that we can have that privilege. If you're here tonight and you're outside of the body of Christ, if you have not been baptized, if you've not made contact with the blood of Christ, if His blood is not covering your sins, you don't have that privilege that Christians have to be able to approach His throne and to ask for mercy and for grace. You're outside of that. But if you've heard the gospel message and you believe it to be true, and you're willing to repent of things that you've done wrong and say, I'm going to make a change in my mind, I'm going to transform myself by the renewing of my mind, I'm not going to be conformed to this world anymore. If you're willing to make a turn in your life and repent, if you're willing to confess that you believe Jesus Christ is the Son of God amongst these witnesses, you can be baptized for the remission of your sins. You can have the blood of Christ covering you. And you can walk out of these doors tonight as a child of God and not have to worry about what might happen between now and the next time you get to hear the gospel message. Maybe you are a child of God, but you've been straying. You haven't been faithful to Him, and you haven't been following Him like you should. If that's the case, you don't need to leave here tonight and not be in a right relationship with God. You can fix that too. Dale is willing to help in any way that he can. I'm sure the men of this congregation are willing to help you in any way that they can. If you have a need, let it be known now as we stand with our brother and as we sing.